welcome back to my channel. You know, today I thought I'd go over a topic that comes up often and is something that I deal with a lot. Being a ecoplant physiologist and the only scientist in our family, I often get asked some very unusual questions. And many of these questions often pertain to misinformation or articles that have been posted on Facebook or Twitter, um, or other unusual sites where people are getting possibly very bad information. And as a scientist and educator, it's very hard to watch the general public, both in terms I've seen on the news, I've seen on my own Facebook account and Twitter handles, um, my inbox even, having so many false news stories or scientific weirdness that makes no sense, or stuff that just is factually incorrect, that it is so outdated or not even debated anymore in science, yet this idea continues to be perpetuated. And I thought, right now, in a time where the pandemic is still going on, right? This is 2021 now, and here in Ontario we're under a lockdown again because the case numbers of COVID-19 have gone through the roof. So we're under mandatory stay-at-home orders. And I think that's okay so long as people are all on the same page and on the same facts. But oddly enough, we're not. There's a lot of people who do not believe there's a virus, or believe that it's transmitted through the airwaves, or that it's a conspiracy, it's all made up. Vaccines don't work. As someone who also studies climate change, besides the whole aspect of the pandemic and the coronavirus, there's tons of theories about that. But there are so many conspiracy theories and misinformation about climate change. I study climate change and its impacts on boreal forest communities and on the impact of fungal tree interactions. And I can tell you, it is true. The Earth is warming. The evidence suggests that. And it suggests that it's mainly driven by human-produced causes, mainly our heavy reliance on fossil fuels. And land use changes, pesticides, and so on have had a whole big problem on the overall biosphere and the geochemical cycles of the planet. That's the fact. It's the way it is. But there's been a lot of misinformation. And I wondered, is there a way that we can sort of figure out how to go through this? Now, many years ago, I put out a video about how to tell pseudoscience and whether something was pseudoscientific or not. And I gave some very good stuff and points there. And I think it might be time to do another one and an update using other ideas of fake news, and how do you go through in your own life, whether it be the daily newspaper, Facebook, Twitter, politicians. How do you go through this and decide what's true and what's not? And how do you properly go through the evaluation of sources and evaluate and critically think about the stuff that you read and whether or not it makes sense using both logic, reason, and scientific evidence and what's known in the world? The first thing you have to do is, and I found this beautiful infographic that the University of Toronto put out, and I'm going to use mainly that to help guide me through this, because I think it's an excellent quick list for you to look at and go through. I'm also going to leave in the comment box below other sources to look at, some primary literature, primary and secondary literature done by scientists and who have been peer reviewed, and for you to look at ways of spotting misinformation and how do you go about inoculating yourself so that you can spot these types of misinformations. So the very first one, of course, and I think we often don't do well enough in teaching in primary or secondary school, is consider the source from where you're getting your information from. So, for example, is it a Facebook post? Is it on some kind of news outlet? Is it on some random dude's webpage? Right? Is it on YouTube by somebody who claims to be a scientist? Like I claim to be a scientist. Am I? Look it up. Right? You can probably find me. Look things up. Right? Don't just take what people say off the cuff. I always have said, look things up. Don't believe me? Go ahead and look. Find evidence. Go and see what I'm saying is true. But always look at your sources. Look at where is it coming from, and is this something that's trustworthy or not so trustworthy, right? I think that's quite important. Another thing to think about when you're looking at sources is what I call source suspicions mainly, which are things that are vague. So when you're reading the post or the article, if it's a very vague statements, very vague descriptions about things, you might want to think about that. Why is it so vague? If this is something that's well known, it should be more in detail, and that's exactly what you should expect to see. The other is untraceable. So once they make a claim, can you go back and find where the original claim came from? If you can't, that's a problem, right? That's a big problem. Another one is, I see this a lot on Facebook and Twitter, anecdotal evidence. Now I know in some areas, like the law for example, sometimes that can be admissible, but it shouldn't be. Like you'll hear, a doctor that I had said this years ago, a friend of mine said it, or so-and-so down the street who was a twice removed friend said this. That doesn't hold up. That's not scientific. That's just hearsay. It's somebody saying something doesn't mean it's true, right? We know that our perceptions are all wrong, right? We know that we can perceive things and be wrong. There's been so many psychological studies that have been done on this to show how fallible our senses are. And science is great to showing you that we measure things knowing that we have that bias essentially with our eyes and our ears and our senses. It's just the way it is. The next thing to think about is to check the author, right? So if you see usually the person who wrote the clip or done the YouTube video or somebody, they have some kind of name or an email. You can figure them out, right? Look them up. Did they, are they just some guy who is a plumber, but he's talking about, climate change? Well, how does he know? Did he read stuff? Where did he read it from? What's his credentials? Why does he know more than the people who have a degree or study that area? Why does he know more? And why should you trust that person more than an expert in the field? Right? The other thing you have to think about is, are they real? And that's another big issue out there. There are so many fake accounts out there. I have been spoofed and spammed myself through my university email. And I have been tricked. They're very sophisticated. And I have been reading some articles done by AI researchers who have been able to train these AI systems to actually generate fake news that's believable. So it's getting more sophisticated. And you have to be even more vigilant about these types of fake bots and fake people, right? The other is check the date. And as an educator, I teach several courses at universities. And the one thing that I often see is students will cite in their papers out-of-date material. So they'll cite something that was from the 1960s. If that's a technique and we still use it the same way, that's fine, right? If it's the original citation of establishing a field, that's fine. But if it's something that is to do with the way some kind of gene works or some kind of thinking at the time of how a concept in biology was thought at that time, and we now know that that's wrong, and you're citing that still and saying that that's how it still works, well, that's wrong. It's out of date. The best thing and the beauty of science is we keep advancing and discovering new things. So always check what is the most up-to-date thing, and you can comb through the references and go back in time if you have to find the original piece of information. But you really have to think about the date. When was it published? All right. Another big one is check your own biases. You know, in this day and age, across the entire globe, everybody's polarized. We have Democrats versus Republicans, conservatives versus liberals. It's just crazy. Everybody's so polarized and have our own political biases, our own inherent biases that are well known. Again, there's lots of literature on there in the social sciences and psychology that show all of our hidden biases that we have. And I think we have to think about that when we are evaluating literature, right? For example, as a male, I might see something a little bit differently than that of my female colleagues, right? I have certain bias than they do. As somebody who's white, I have a slightly different bias and way of viewing things than somebody of a different background or of somebody of a different skin color or nationality. And so we have to think about that when we are evaluating this stuff. Another thing to think about is going beyond the source. And I've seen this so many times. I had a friend on my Facebook feed who was talking about Bill Gates and how he's funded the coronavirus and how he's invented it and he's going to microchip us all by giving us vaccines. And they had given one article, some news article, that seemed to have come out of thin air, essentially. And when I started to read it and take it apart and go beyond what was in that article and find other sources, a lot of it was wrong. A lot of it was wrong and flat out wrong. People misquoted things. They only played a snippet of something, but didn't watch the entire video or his entire thing that he wrote. They just took one or two words. You can't do that, right? You have to read things in their context and read them in its entirety. So you should always read things in their entirety. Another thing to think about when you're reading these articles is the language people are using, right? If the language is poor and there is very bad grammar, spelling, and so on, that should be a red flag. When I get emails or some things sent to my inbox that I know are spam, it's usually because there's terrible grammar. It's the English is awful. And so I know that this is probably a scam and I don't go for it. Neither should others. Think about it. The other thing you should think about as well is it pulling at my emotions? So news in general, I know nowadays all news agencies are trying to make catchy headlines to catch your attention and get your attention. The problem with that is that they often use slightly misleading headlines or headlines that get you emotionally involved, and many misinformation sites and blogs and so on do the same. They put things in there to make you angry, passionate, and happy or overjoyed and overwhelming emotion, because that's how you get the most reaction and the most shares and likes and so on. If you're just doing something factual, now take it from me, I'm quite boring overall as a scientist. When I'm presenting lectures or data, it's just presenting data. Most people, when they hear me talk about what science really is, it's very fun, it's very interesting to myself and others who think like me and who are in the field. But a lot of people say it's kind of boring, it's all numbers and stats and we don't really care. But that's what it really is. So think about the language, and is it tugging at your emotions? Because if it's facts, facts are facts, right? They don't have emotion. The whole point of science is to not have emotion. It's just data and facts. That's why it's so great. Think about that. The other thing you should think about is when you're looking at the sources and reading beyond it, is the particular article that you're looking at, is it overshared? So is it like saying, I hear this also on Facebook a lot too, share with your friends, lose 10 pounds in one day. It's like, really? If that was the case, this would be well known everywhere, and you could go to your doctor or your pharmacist and they would say, yeah, take this. It's well known, it's been supported to do it. But you don't see that, do you? You only hear it on these very unusual, obscure sites that say, hey, share now, spread the news. Think about it critically. When you're looking at other sources, look at other places, like, what is it, Politico, there's Snopes, I go there a lot, factcheck.org, to see whether or not this story has been put on there and other people have been fact-checking it. Look at it. Just do your research. Look at whatever they're saying. Look at where did they get their information from. And this is just not with people who are misinformation or fake news. I've seen this in ordinary articles, right, done by places like the CBC, CNN, BBC, where, especially when it comes to the science, they will misquote or not present the entire context of the study in the correct way and giving an incorrect interpretation of the results. It's very, very damaging because it makes it seem like the science is just changing their minds, and that's what the public often believes, and every day it's a new thing. One day you can eat chocolate, the next you can't. But that's not how it works in science. And so it does a little bit of an injustice when these scientific reporters don't actually report it very correctly. Another thing to think about is it a joke? And I had a friend of mine who likes to post stuff from The Onion, a well-known joke site, that kind of plays on this idea of fake news. And I've had people, literally, and it's funny to watch, where they actually are arguing with him, believing it's true. And he's like, no, it's fake. It's The Onion. It's well known to be fake. This is all just made up. And people are arguing with him, right? That's an issue. And it's an issue not just in this society. It's in all the whole world, and it's been shown in science. Some of the articles I'm posting, you'll see that, where they have done studies where they found that people have a problem evaluating media sources. They have a hard time telling fake from fiction. Or sorry, fake from fact. Pardon me. Misspoke. Another thing you should think about is if you have access to them, go to an expert, right? And that's why I get a lot of questions. And I'm glad that my family comes to me and asks me questions. Is this true? I remember years ago I had family members ask me if it was true that I was being paid by the Chinese government to spread the hoax. I have some people who follow the current United States President, Donald Trump. And he would, in the beginning of his tenure as the U.S. President, he said that, it's a hoax. China is made it up about climate change. And some people believe that, right? And they asked me, is that true? No, it's not true. And if it is, I'm living very poorly, right? I make, less than $40,000 a year? If that's the case, then Jesus, I should be making a lot more than that if this was all just a big old hoax, right? So that's some things you have to think about. Ask an expert. Look it up. If you have, go to the local university, go to the library, right? Use your sources. And the last one, which is not on this infographic, but is something I feel very passionate about, is improving scientific literacy. I have, for a long time, being an educator in a university, noticed the importance of scientific literacy. If you don't understand how the world works around you, in this day and age, in ages past, you might have got away with it. But we live in such a technological age where there is so much science that is all around us, from the computers and microphones, the internet, everything around us. How we even get our textiles and my tea right now, farming, the paper products, everything around us, how these homes are built, are all based upon science and understanding the principles of physics and chemistry and biology and medicine and psychology. It's a hard stuff. These are hard things. And I think we as educators need to educate the population better. And it starts, well, obviously with our kids, but also the adults, because we can educate our kids now, and improve the future. But right now, there are people in power all over the world, and who will continue to be in power over the next several generations, because we did not do a good job at teaching science and increasing scientific literacy, that things are not going to change right away. We need people to be scientifically educated. And this is something that I often think about, that Carl Sagan said in one of his books. I believe it was A Candlelight in the Dark, a Demon-Haunted World. Excellent book. Excellent book. And he talks just about that, how living in a world where the general population has no idea about the science or how math or statistics works, and they say, yep, leave it to the experts. Nah, I don't want to do that. Leave it to others to figure out. You get an ignorant population who can't decide if the Green New Deal is a good idea, if climate change is real, is evolution real, are vaccines going to cause autism, right? You still see that around, and it's been debunked and shown that guy was wrong in his data. He made up stuff or didn't characterize it correctly. That's the way it goes. And science is self-correcting. We redo experiments. People all over the world take your methods and redo them. And if they don't work, they come back and they say, hey, it doesn't work. And then the scientists say, well, maybe it was something wrong with what you did. Maybe you did something wrong and something weird happened in your lab. But if everybody else says it didn't happen, it must not be able to happen, and we can't replicate it. Right? So we become cautious with the things that we say or do. So with that, I want you to think about it. Think critically about stuff. I haven't made a science video like this for quite some time. In part because a lot of people get upset and charged at it, and they don't like it when you're challenging their ideals. Nobody does. That's a part of our biases, right? Check your biases. We all have them. Being uncomfortable, as Lawrence Krause used to say, and having your beliefs challenged is something called learning, right? We all have these ideas that could be incorrect, but when they're challenged and we have evidence that's presented to us that's very compelling and properly sourced and has the data behind it, we have to go with that, because we might have been wrong. Our perceptions, which we know from psychological experimentation, is wrong. Oftentimes, eyewitness testimony is wrong. It's one of the worst forms of evidence. So yes. So with that, I know it's a terrible idea to talk about this. You know, I used to be so hyped to talking about video games and things, but it's something that's been weighing on my mind lately. So with that, guys, I really hope you guys think critically, go through things, improve yourselves, do something great this year, and don't be duped by these people who want to make fools of us and make a quick buck, usually off of people's ignorance. So don't do that. Don't let them do that. You guys are better than that. I want better for all of us. So with that, guys, take care, and I'll speak with you all probably very soon with something much more cheery. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.